Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, General Goldfein, thank you for being here today. I'm sorry I'm late. I just came from the White House arrival ceremony for President Macron. I will say that your Air Force platoon performed excellently, almost as good as the Army platoon. Secretary Wilson, we passed a 2-year budget a couple months ago and an omnibus spending bill for the rest of this year. Obviously, that's given a bit of a reprieve from the budget caps and sequestration under the Budget Control Act. However, we still have to implement the second year of that budget agreement. Could you explain to me the impacts that continuing resolutions have had on the Air Force and why it's important that we pass a DoD appropriations bill in a timely fashion this summer?
Yes, sir. Senator, I think that nothing has done more damage to the United States Air Force than budget uncertainty or sequester over the last decade. And certainty allows us to do things like work with industry to maximize the munitions production up to industry capacity. It allows us to sign contracts other than in the last half of the year. So probably the most important thing is industry certainty. We have not sequestered ourselves this year. We have acted as if as if the budget was ultimately going to be passed. But the uncertainty with industry is a major issue.
Thank you. And then, of course, we'll be back in this situation in about 18 months because the last 2 years of the Budget Control Act, fiscal years 2020 and 2021, remain. I assume that it's imperative that Congress act to eliminate those caps and the risk of sequestration for the same reasons for those 2 fiscal years?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The Air Force's unfunded priorities list states that the ground-based strategic deterrent and long-range standoff weapon programs are both expected to run out of funding by the end of the year due to accelerated timelines. Please explain a little bit more about the acceleration of the timelines of those programs.
Senator, they're ahead of schedule. They're making very good progress, and they are ahead of schedule.
So that's a good news story, then, not a bad news story.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. What impact, if any, would the Air Force face on these programs if it does not receive the extra funding that is identified in that unfunded priorities list?
Senator, our unfunded priorities list this year, that's because of the increase in the money that the Congress appropriated in the budget deal, is actually smaller than it's ever been, at least in probably the last decade. But what we did in those unfunded priorities, which we're required by statute to provide, is accelerate things that are already in our 5-year plan. So pull more things to the left if there were additional top line. We are actually executing on the nuclear modernization, on the research and development phase of that faster than we thought, and that would be a good place to keep the progress going.
Thank you. General, how many fighter aircraft does the Air Force have today?
Certainly currently have 2,151 aircraft.
How many are combat coded?
Approximately 75% of those.
A little over 1,500 then?
Yes.
Okay. So you are in compliance with the NDAA provision from a couple years ago?
We are.
To maintain a minimum of 1,900 aircraft and 1,100 combat coded. Does the new national defense strategy have any impact on what our requirements are today for both total aircraft and combat-coded aircraft?
It does. And in fact, we are going to be coming back to this committee by August with our assessment of what not only the number of aircraft, but more importantly, the number of squadrons that are required, not only with fighters, but with fighters, bombers, command and control, personnel recovery, all those elements that are required to successfully support the national defense strategy. And to the previous discussion on A-10, we discussed earlier that we have gone from 134 fighter squadrons to 56. One of the reasons that the Secretary and I are looking at all of those fighter squadrons, because the last thing we want to do right now is get smaller. We need to work with this committee to get larger and make sure that we can source the number of airframes, the maintainers, the people, and the squadrons we need to adequately support the strategy.
Thank you, General. And Madam Secretary, thank you for your visit to Arkansas to sit with our National Guard and Little Rock Air Force Base.
Thank you, Senator Cotton.